What's good, everybody? I'm Jędrek, he's Sodek, and
Hello.
today we are here for the July 2022 Modern Monthly Metagame Trends. Let's go. Alrighty, so this is our first metagame trend at Mystical Teachings now. We, as you all know, adapted from Modern Solutions to Mystical Teachings, but those videos will largely stay the same. So first of all, we will talk about decks to watch. So decks that maybe were known even a few months back, but recently they've been having some, maybe not great success, but greater than before. And then we will go. Yes?
Okay, and about this great success. There are a lot of decks that are capable of winning tournaments in Modern at the moment, but to get to our tier list, you need more than just a few results. So, for instance, there will in the decks to watch tier list there will be decks that are, in my opinion, good enough to be in the tier list, but they are not as popular as other decks to be there. Maybe excluding Dredge because that's my pet deck.
Yeah.
Outside that,
we are much more interested in like continuous success rather than one-time spike. So, for example, if a deck wins a Modern Challenge versus a deck that has 4 top 8s, we are much more interested in a second deck. Because the difference between winning and top 8ing is not that big, but continuously good showings are what we are interested in. Okay, so we'll start with decks to watch. And we have, I want to say, 4 of them. Yes, 4 of them. And there are Glimpse, Prisontron, Red Black Scam, and Wish Shift. So Sodek, I know you are somewhat keen on Glimpse. Do you mind sharing a few thoughts about Glimpse?
yeah, sure. The deck was around for some time already, and there were many different versions of it. First of all, there was a version with Griselbrand, Miracle, something like Hypergenesis from years ago. But the more people were trying to break the engine, the more they went to more mid-rangey stuff. And first of all, there was a Goblin Dark Dwellers situations, etc. But eventually, Xenovan showed the version with an elemental package with Risen Reef, Endurance, Fury, and Omnat. This deck has surprisingly good mid game if the combo is stopped, for example, with Teferi or whatever else you can think of. But the weaknesses of the deck stayed the same. This deck is quite weak or quite unstable to win on turn 3 as a combo deck, because there was some option to do this, but the more mid-rangey the deck gets, the more the slower it is. Also, it's still quite easy to stop, and the tempo deck with 1 or 2 counter spells should be able to buy enough time to control the board later on. Overall, in my opinion, the combination of a lack of turn free kills and still being able to be slowed down enough to lose to regular stuff is something that stopped Glimpse from being at the top tier. But I think it's a solid tier B in terms of power level. And I think that the more players will try to play the deck, the more obvious will be for us to include the deck to this tier.
Yeah, my biggest concern about Glimpse is that it's, in my opinion, significantly worse than other Cascade decks. And as I mentioned many times before, I really don't like playing like worse versions of other decks. It's not like 1-to-1 in terms like there was a situation when Shadow and Blue-Red were basically this similar decks, and we're talking about being worse version of another one. It's not as clear with Cascade decks, but still something that makes me reluctant to put Glimpse into our actual tier list. Okay, next up we have Prisontron, which had both Modo and paper success. Oh, and by the way, we are mostly focusing on Modo results as always, because there are some discrepancies regarding on which side of Atlantic you are. You either think that 4-color is the best deck in the format or Murktide. And those metagames are always biased. There's a lot of Merktide in Europe, a lot of 4-color in States, and Modo is
Also-
the most like impartial metagame, let's say.
Okay. Also, that's also in my opinion important to say that in paper tournaments more players are trying their own brews. So compared to MTGO, when you can just rent any good deck you want, it's harder to find all the cards you need in paper. So as a result, you see more lower tier decks in paper tournaments, and this can impact the results too.
I don't think that's the case anymore. I think that over the pandemic, many people invested their money that they've had. Like they've had steady income, but they couldn't go out, travel for holidays and stuff like this. So they were amassing money that they usually spend. And a lot of people spend this money for magic cards. I saw a lot of tweets with people's mailbags and the photos of the cards that they bought over the pandemic. And I think many people caught up on cards. And I do think that it's quite easy to get basically any deck you want if you want to play it.
Kinda yes, but also there's a thing with getting new cards. It's much easier to get new cards on MTGO because it's
That's
just a couple
true.
clicks, and it's harder to get. Like for example, you have an idea to play Prison Throne. We'll talk about it in a second, and getting these cards, like ordering them, waiting to get them, etc., takes much more time than MTGO. But
That's
still,
true.
that's maybe not a marginal difference, but it's not as hard as like other players would think.
I would argue that playing tier 1 decks is actually easier on paper. Contrary to what you said, because as you said, like if you want to play some of those less popular decks like Prison Tron, there is much less chance that you already have most cards for the deck or that your friends has them. And with like 4-color, you are just having all the cards that you normally play in other decks. So if you, for example, bought cards for blue-red or for blue-white, it's very easy for you to put together 4-color. And you can't rent 4-color on Modo because it's just too expensive on Modo. So actually, I do think that there is it's easier / more convenient to play 4-color in paper than on Modo if you already have like a fairly reasonable modern collection.
Okay, so please give us comments about this topic. We are very interested in your opinions about
Yes.
that. Moving on to Prison Tron.
Going back to Tron, there was an event in Malmö in Sweden, around 200 people, and the winner was Oskar Christensen, and he was playing Prison Tron, and the deck designer of Prison Tron, according to Oskar, is Lori WWA. Shout out to Lori, very good Modo player. And why do we have Prison Tron here instead of other flavors of Tron like Eldrazi Tron or something? What makes Prison Tron all that different and makes that it sees success where other colorless versions of Tron does not?
In my opinion, the key is to have enough hate elements, so more of your game ones are about finding these hate pieces, and it's not about like casting Matter Reshaper and thinking that it will change anything, but like focusing on early Chalice of the Void, because like in many matchups, Chalice on 0 on 1 will like be as close as winning the game as you think about it. There's also like it's a powerful Karn deck. It's also an Urza's Saga deck, which like we often maybe not ignore but forget because we focus too much on the hate element of the deck. Also, I like the aspect of Serum Powder and Mystic Forge, just to find your Tron and good hate cards post side, but more often, and having a nice card advantage engine, something that like the previous versions did lacked a bit.
Yep.
So
Mostly.
overall, I think that Prison Tron is a go-to version of Tron, and I think it has It's not as bad as other versions. Or maybe that's the best
I don't know.
way to say that.
I think Green Tron might still be better. We have it on our tier list. It has a bunch of success in like PTQs recently. But Prison Tron is definitely a better choice than Eldrazi Tron if you want to play colorless Tron decks. That's 100% non-negotiable in my opinion. Playing against Staring Bridge is much better than playing Matter Reshaper. Okay, next up we have Red Black Scam, as it was dubbed by Pascal Maynard quite some time ago, which is basically the Grief / Fury and Undying effects, or quote-unquote Undying effects mid-range deck, also stuff like Ragavan, etc. I do like this deck, actually. I do think that if you want to play like a Thoughtseize mid-range game similarly to what Jund did, and for some reason you don't want to play Death Shadow, this is your second best bet. I do think it's better than like some Saga decks, actual factual Jund. You are playing 2 colors, so you are very stable on mana. You can play Blood Moon, which is an excellent card, and you have very powerful starts with Grief and the Undying Trick. Let's call it Undying Trick, because you can stack your triggers in a way that you first see what's in their hand, and then before the evoke causes you to sacrifice it, you can target it with the Undying Trick. So this way, you won't be blown out by a removal spell unless they have 2 copies. Then you kind of can't do anything about it. But even then, you are still trading cards, and even if you are 1 card behind on that trade, it's still what you want to do with a Thoughtseize deck, or like with black discard decks in general. You want to trade cards and make the game as smaller as possible.
Yeah. Also, as like important part is that if they have 2 removal spells, you can just like grab their business spell instead, and because like they have a lot of removal spells instead of something that actually does anything to the board, you have even more time to set up your powerful interactions later on. So I think the deck is criminally underplayed. I think it's much better than people think it is, and I hope that one day we'll have Red Black Scam in our tier list because more people will play it. I will probably never play it because it's totally not my style and not the way of the way of playing Magic I like. But I think that more people should try this deck.
Yeah, I don't know about much better, but it is better than most people think it is. And one very key part that I think is overlooked is that those Undying spells obviously work with Elementals, but they also work with Ragavan. And usually connecting with Ragavan is a pretty good recipe for winning the game. And this deck is very good at protecting Ragavans. So that's something that can't be overlooked. Okay, last but not least, we have Wish Shift, which mostly emerged again as a foil to 4-color at the MOCS that happened, I want to say 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 at this point.
Even 4.
No, definitely not 4. Some time ago, depending on when we will actually release this video. The first season of 2022. That's a precise answer, which tournament we are talking about. And the metagame was 4 color decks, 2 shadow decks, and 2 Valakut decks. And Will Kruger ended up taking it down on Valakut, beating McWinsos in the finals. McWinsos was playing GDS.
Shadow.
And very important thing in my opinion is that out of each 4-color deck, there were 4 4-color decks and 4 non-4-color decks, and they all get paired against each other in round 1. So every matchup was 4-color against non-4-color, and 4-color lost every single of those matches because it just basically get hated out. We will get into it a bit later when we actually will talk about 4-color. But yeah, Wish Shift, I think many people view it as a deck that's very narrow because it only beats 4-color. And I don't think that's true. I think what's actually the biggest problem of Wish Shift is that it has very, very hard time against Blue-Red. And that's what prevents Wish Shift from being like a great overall like open field meta choice, because especially in Europe, you will see many blue-red decks, even though one Wish Shift deck actually top-8'd the event in Malmö that we talked about just a while back. So
Yeah, in my opinion, like people were at first, like after this Mox performance, were saying that Titan Shift is more about the like solution to the very weird slow tournament meta. But in the same weekend, it ended in the finals of the Modern Challenge, so it was a sign that maybe it's not only about this very small tournament; it's more about finding a hole in the metagame. Right now, I don't think this hole is still there, but it's, in my opinion, worth to remember that this type of deck exists, especially with the Wish package, because Wish package means that you can have a bit better time against linear decks because you can find your hate pieces earlier on. For instance, if you are playing versus Cascade decks, you can just cast Chalice of the Void or Tormund Script or whatever else you need that's cheap. And in my opinion, that's something that can help the deck establish as a tier B or tier C deck.
all right, so now we are moving to our actual factual tier list. We have a tier list explanation video that we used to include in all those before, but now we made it into a separate video, so you won't waste your time scrolling. You can find it right here. And this month, we have only one S tier deck, and that's blue-red. We've elaborated on it many times before. What still is, in my opinion, the biggest strength of blue-red is its consistency. It's a two-color deck filled with cantrips. It floods very rarely. It screws very rarely. It executes its plan really well, and it's a very, very consistent deck and can be adapted to beat basically anything. So, blue-red is just, in my opinion, undisputed best deck in Modern, even if it's not by like an extremely high or big margin. It is subtle, like it's visibly better than other decks in my opinion, but not by much, I would say.
Yeah, I can
It's
say that. But it's also, in my opinion, fine having this type of deck as a top tier because there are decks that like prey on play against Murktide, and they can just like you can hide out the like heavy Murktide meta. It's not impossible to do that. Dredge is really good, and
it's like a one weekend exploit usually, because then people will come prepared, and prepared Murktide will beat Dredge because they will just have a sideboard for it.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think Murktide really reminds me of when Phoenix was the best deck. It's like same colors, but also it's like a heavy cantrip deck that can just be tuned to just have game against whatever you want. Like you just put
True.
3 copies of any given sideboard card in your sideboard, and you can just get your percentages much higher. Okay.
But one question for you. Like I know, and probably most of people watching this video know that you are a Ledger Shader lover and Dragon Rage Channeler hater. Do you think that there's like when would you recommend to still play Dragon Rage Channeler? What type of meta?
Okay. So first of all, I don't think like you and many people as well quite often put Ledger Shader and Dragon Rage Channeler as the different sides of the same coin, that we are playing one or another. I don't think that's the case. You can easily play both. And I think that you should play Ledger Shader no matter what in some quantity. I would recommend 4, but 3 or less likely, but maybe 2 sometimes is where I would want to be. Ledger Shader is really good at beating Graveyard Hate. Ledger Shader is really good at playing mid-range game because you can actually block opposing creatures really well. So I would still play the bird even if I have Darcy's. And speaking of Dragon's Rage Channeler, the most important matchups where Dragon's Rage Channeler is bad are Mirror and 4-color. I don't think you want Dragon's Rage Channeler against either of those decks. So it's the question whether you want to be a bit better against those decks or be a bit better against everything else. And I tend to side towards being better against the best / most popular decks because they will be the significant part of any winner's metagame. So you will have better chances later on in the tournament. But that being said, Dragon Rage Channeler is really good if you want to just attack your opponent and they won't have any interaction. So for example, you're playing against Living End. Dragon's Rage Channeler is good there. You are playing against Amulet. It's another creature. You are playing against...
Yavmot, I would say.
I don't like it against Yawgmoth because it can't block. And I think you are more of a controlling side in the matchup.
Okay.
But against like Tron, against Dredge, against maybe Burn, maybe Creativity, those type of decks. Like if you want to just be purely aggressive side in the matchup and your opponent is not presenting much interaction for your creatures, I do think that Dragon's Rage Channeler is still a pretty good card in those cases. But as I've said before, I do expect blue, red, and 4-color to be very popular. And I think the delta is bigger here than if you have a Channeler against like... Well, I guess it's particularly good against Living End specifically. But against other decks, it's not that important. Like Living End is by far the most important matchups, I think, for Channeler. And you will do much better game one. Not so much game two because you will have more interaction that's actually relevant. But game one, I think Channeler is really important against Living End. So
okay.
I think it's close overall.
Okay, moving on to A tier.
Yes.
What do you have here?
In the A tier, we have 4-color, Hammer, Living End, Rhinos, and Yawgmoth. We won't focus as much on Hammer, Living End, Rhinos, and Yawgmoth because we already mentioned them beforehand and we've talked extensively about them. But
to be honest, nothing really changed in these decks. It's not like someone found a new way to rebuild them. Of course, for instance, there are many subtypes of the Rhinos deck. For instance, some players play Archmage's Farm, some don't. You can play any flex slot, like any cards in a flex slot you want, but it was already like made, and like talking about it like again won't change anything. Maybe one exception, Hammer, in terms of results, in terms of top 8, was very close to Merktide. It was like 9 compared to 8, and we have this weekend when Hammer
I think it actually got equalized this weekend because there were like the Saturday one had 3 Merktide, 0 Hammer in top 8, and the Sunday one had 4 Hammer, 0 Merktide. So I think they are tied but at 12 apiece, I think. So yeah, what basically separates Hammer from Merktide in my eyes is that Hammer is much easier to hate it out. You can't hate out Merktide with a card. You can play deck that inherently good against Merktide, as you mentioned Dredge before, for example. Mm-hmm. But there are no sideboard cards for Merktide. The closer you have, or the closest you have for a sideboard card against Merktide is Unlicensed Hairs. And if you build your deck correctly as a Merktide player, you still have quite some game against that card. So. But yeah, 4-color, which is the only deck that fell from S tier into A tier throughout last month, in our opinion. And it's still, I think the narrative that 4-color is the best deck in Modern also kind of fell off in States. I think people are more about, now this is one of the best, of like the best decks, but it's not the undisputed best deck. And in our eyes, it never was. But once again, 4-color, what was shown at MOCS, is a really exploitable deck compared to Merktide. It's quite easy to hate out 4-color with a strategy and with cards as well. maybe less so with cards like you can play, of course, cards like Turak. McWinsos played main deck Turak in GDS, and he was very pleased with those. But more so strategies like decks like Titan Shift or Wish Shift that we mentioned before are really, really good against 4-color, and it's not that much that 4-color can do to stop that, really.
And like this trend showed in results when 4-color was maybe not like we couldn't find it, but the results were much worse compared to like 2 or 3 months ago. So if you have 4-color and you spend a lot of money building it, sure, keep playing it. But like saying that this is the best deck, but you should ban something from it is very far from true.
Yes. I think important part was also highlighted in Canister's, maybe not new, but still somewhat recent article from a couple of weeks or maybe even months ago at this point. I don't know when it actually got published. And the article is about why he swore to never play Yorion again and stuff like that. I will link it down below so you can take a read. And one very astute point that he made was about 4-color scaling poorly with player's skill. I think that's true. I think that if you are it's quite easy to outplay from the other side of the board. Like if your opponent is playing like Merktide, they can outplay you because their cards are cheaper and they can line it up in a way that's very inconvenient for you to answer. And your clunky playing one spell per turn deck can't really keep up with that because you will spend your mana inefficiently. And if you want to play your spells for free instead of for 5 mana, that's also a losing battle because if you 2-for-1 yourself to kill Ragavan, your opponent will cast Expressive Iteration and will grind you out. So I do think that 4-color is really good against people who has less experience, and both with 4-color and with Modern. And by the time you're getting to the top of the standings, you will get paired against like cream of the crop Merktide players at the tournament, and you will get or other decks like Death Shadow. Okay. Death Shadow is the same thing. Like cream of the crop people who are playing 1 and 2 mana spells in their deck and will outplay not even outplay you, but will outplay your strategy, and you can't do anything about it because your deck is constructed in a specific way.
I also wanted to say that it's not like you need to play blue to be able to outplay 4-color. If you are playing a Cascade deck, we're also blue, but whatever. If you are even, I saw even the huge difference of like Yavmot or Hammer players that like know what they want to do in a matchup. They had much more play, and of course they will most likely lose if 4-color plays on the play Vren into Teferi into Omnat into whatever else or Fury. But it's quite hard to get this type of very powerful start in a 4-color, and there's a room for doing tricks.
Yeah, I mostly singled out blue decks because they have expressive iteration. So 2-for-1ing yourself as a 4-color player against them is that much more dangerous than against a non-expressive iteration decks.
To be honest, versus Yavmot, there's also problematic because then Yavmot can also draw cards, and that's
but you can answer Yavmot more easily than you can answer iteration usually. But okay. Enough about 4-color and about A tier in general. We have B tier, and in B tier we have Affinity, Amulet, Burn, Creativity, which is our newest addition, Elementals, and GDS. Elementals fell from A tier to B tier, mostly because we still consider Elementals to be inferior to the Blink version of 4-color. So if 4-color fell from S to A, then it's only fair to move Elementals down a notch to visualize how we feel about it compared to the other versions of 4-color. Affinity, Amulet, Burn, and GDS stay the same from the last month, so we won't talk about it whatsoever. But
the only thing I want to say is that like when you are waiting for your B tier deck to have a really good weekend, like you can sometimes find these weekends. And for instance, the last weekend for Burn was a breakout performance. The deck had like multiple players in the top 8 of the Modern Challenges. Also got in the 9th place, I believe. And why I don't think it will last forever. This also showed that playing your tier B or lower strategy can be right and can be a good solution to win tournaments. Okay, about the creativity. Uh,
Okay, you disrupted me very
sorry,
violently. Uh,
sorry.
but yeah, uh, I think that creativity is a deck that we used to ridicule is too strong of a word. The only deck we really ridicule is blue white. Well, I guess Merfolk as well, but. We had our issues with creativity that mostly stemmed from the fact that it used to be a deck that was playing all those 4-color cards, like the same Ren and 6 Teferi Time Raveler core that traditional 4-color decks were playing. But the cost of doing so in a Dwarven Mine mana base was disproportional to the payoff of doing so. And for months, people were very stubborn about playing those Planeswalkers in their creativity decks. And even if they've had some success from time to time, largely they've been proven to be too inconsistent. And also for months, when each time somebody had some at least a small decent showing with creativity, be it like top 32 a day challenge, top 16, maybe even top 8 sometimes, or even 5 OA league, and then I saw the screen on Twitter, and I saw all those like 2.5 colors creativity decks. I remarked them many times in our videos, saying that I think this is the way for creativity decks to go. You want to be 2 colors, maybe 3, and then you have a small splash, like you have 2 duals that let you cast Archon of Cruelty. We'll talk about Archon a bit more later on. But this way your mana is actually playable, and you should be more of a combo control deck similar to what Through the Breach, for example, was back in the day. You're
Maybe
playing
Scape Shift.
maybe
like
Scape Shift.
Timur Scape Shift version.
I think it's more akin to Through the Bridge in that case, because with Scape Shift you needed that critical mass of things, of lands to win, and because of that you really needed to play ramp spells in your deck, and you are much more susceptible to mulligans because you actually needed to make your land drops, and you need a material to make your land drops. And sure. In creativity you are much more low resource. You need 4 mana, and you don't even need a creatures if you have Heart Evidence. So your deck is built much more in a way of, I have some Spell Pierces, some Lightning Bolts, maybe some 2 mana counter spells like Remand, Mana Leak. Then you have Ren and 6 in those versions that are successful recently. And then creativity and big monsters. So instead of being like a mopey 4-color midrange deck, you are much more focused on actually executing your combo. The 2 green cards that you were splashing for, because you are base blue-red, and then you have you are base red, and then you splash both blue and green, even if you have more blue cards than green cards. But the green cards that you are playing in the main deck are Ren and 6 that I already mentioned, and Explore, because you want to ramp your combo, and you actually do need to have lands in play for Dwarven Mine to be good. So Explore is a much better alternative than Signets or other cards that are played, for example, in all spells decks.
Yeah. And also, it's kind of important that, like, some of you would say, maybe Growth Spiral could be better because, you can do this in end step, represent something. But in practice, like, being able to cast your spell on turn 2 easier is much more important, especially with the effect like Explore that drawn later in the game will not always put the land from your hand because there won't be any more to pull. So Explore is here, and it's Explore, not Growth Spiral, because you want to cast it on turn 2, so you can thread a turn 3 creativity into Archon. The one card I want to mention is Fable of the Mirror Breaker. The card was like, we're looking like, we already know that the card is really good in Pioneer. I have no idea if it's good in standard, but I assume it is.
It is really good in
Uh,
standard.
Yeah, and players were trying to find the home for it in modern, and I think this creativity deck is one because you want to put creatures that and not playing creatures, so token making I think is really good. You want to draw into your combo and discard useless Archon of Cruelties from hand. That's good, and also copying Archon of Cruelty later on is something that's actually quite powerful. So all these modes are, are good in the deck, and I strongly believe this increases the power of the deck overall.
For sure, yeah. And speaking of Archon, back in the day, people were trying different big monsters to cheat into the game. First, they were playing Velomachus and a bunch of Time Walks. Then they were playing Emrakul and Serra's Emissary. But now they are on Archons pretty unanimously. And I think that they move in a very good direction because Archon is actually hard castable in this deck. You have Rensky, you have treasure tokens from Fable, from Prismatic Command, you have Explores. So you will make your land drops, and it's not that hard to cast Archon on turn like 6 or 7 if the game goes long. And also, Archon is a part of maybe strategy is too big of a word, but you actually can win, for example, against Living End just by discarding Archons. Like, if you go for a Shardless Agent because that's your Cascade spell, it's not that hard for one Archon to actually beat your four creatures board.
Yeah, because you gain 6 life, opponent loses 6 life, and they sacrifice 2 creatures. 2 is a lot. And
Yes.
then you deal like also 6 damage in the air.
And 6 from the trigger, so you are already dealing 12 damage if they go for before they have the time to do anything. And if you do something like in response to Shardless Living and you Prismatic Command and discard 2 Archons, then the game is over. So that's good. And what it also means is that you can much more easily, like your creativity scales much better because you actually can creativity for free and it will be game ending almost every single time. And beforehand, like
also,
when you were playing just Velo, you can't do that because you have 2 Velomachus and it doesn't do anything. When you had 1 Emrakul, 1 Serra's Emissary, you could, but Archon is a much more castable, much more flexible card to have in your deck.
Also, it's very important, in my opinion, how these threats match up against answers. So, for instance, if the opponent has Solitude in hand, your Emrakul will do close to nothing. But if you have Archon, the opponent will discard a card, you will draw a card, you gain some life. So at least you will gain some form of value.
Yeah, I think the most important answer to consider other than Solitude is Teferi Time Raveler, because it also happened quite often. Actually, Tefering your opponent's Archon feels pretty damn bad. I was on the Teferi end. I was on the Teferi end of the situation 1 or 2 times, and it wasn't nice.
Okay, one thing that, in my opinion, is worth pointing out is the risk of playing creativity in terms of sideboard. Creativity sideboard is not as, like, you would imagine that if you are playing a 4-color deck, you should play all the best sideboard cards. But because of how the creativity works, but you are searching for artifact or a creature, you can't play any artifact or creatures because you want to always for Archon. For instance, this is why Living End, even with the Archon think around, like the Archon being a problematic threat if it gets to the graveyard, is still a really bad matchup for the creativity deck. And there aren't many great tools to make it better. Maybe outside just playing Black Leyline, but who wants to do that in so wide modern metagame?
Maybe you can play Endurance.
No, you can't, because then your
Endurance is a creature.
Yeah, I just said that.
I was very focused on the artifact part because usually the hate is artifact. So maybe it's like a sorcery or that doesn't seem great. You have to play like Ravenous but it's not always active. Yeah, Leyline is probably the best card.
Or just Flusterstorms, but
Or Flusterstones, of course.
outside this matchup, Creativity showed that it's capable of winning tournaments and the deck is quite good. And once that there's no Teferi and there are better cards instead, I think it's a reasonable choice.
Yes, and I do think that Creativity has a lot of potential to grow further. Like it's still, this shell is much better than the 4-color shells that were there before, but it still has a bunch of room to improvements, in my opinion.
For instance, do you want to play Transmogrifies? If yes, how many of them do you want to play? Do you want to play Jane's Mind Sculptor or not? What like counter spell removal package you want to play? So for a long time, Remand was the way to go, just to draw into Creativity. Nowadays, Spell Pierce is more and more played. So, and also, I would also like to see how many hard evidence you will play, because like some people play 4, some people play 3. There are some differences between the lists, and I assume that next month we'll get these answers once more players will find the results.
C tier. Have Dredgetron and Blue-White, Greentron that is. Nothing I really want to say about any of these decks. They're just not that great.
Yeah, like we removed Belcher because it didn't get any results in the last month. The deck is like still can be quite good in slower meta games, but like the lack of results forced me to agree that we have to remove it. About Dredge, thanks to Ryan 100495 for the 8-2 at the PTQ. This let me like convince Jędrek to keep the deck here. I still believe that the deck's power level is somewhere between like B, maybe C from time to time, but there's a lot of hate in people's main deck and sideboards that's not designed to be Dredge, but it's somehow good. For instance, more and more Rhino players are playing Endurance's main deck, and that's something it's really hard to force to break through and to beat it with the raw power of the deck. Sometimes you can, but not always. And this like the change between sometimes losing to the card and not having to lose to it because it's not played, like makes a difference in terms of having results in the tournaments.
Yep. I guess we already mentioned Tron having some success in the PTQs recently. I know that One Principle or Principe, I would say. Top 4, I think, the qualifier with Tron. Like, I do think that Tron is like still okay-ish on power level. It's not like, because Modern is so focused on being mana efficient and stuff right now, you still get to overpower many decks in the late game. Because there aren't many like control decks that can still battle you later on. And what actually hurts Tron is that I think its matchup against Blue-Red is not very good. Especially if Blue-Red player has Magus or Blood Moons in the sideboard. Like, if you have a Moon effect as a 4-color player or Blue-Red player, I don't think that Tron will win very often against you, which is the problem. And then Blue-White. Blue-White is just cringe. Unless you are a French Hall of Famer or one of their friends, I wouldn't play for Blue-White.
Blue-White is, in my opinion, is a really good example of playing a worse version of the deck. Like, okay, maybe not because like you don't have any options to kill quickly on ending game quickly like Blue-Red does, but you have like there are other decks that has a lot of counter magic and removal spells.
I think you are basically taking worst parts of 4-color and worst parts of Blue-Red and putting it into one deck. You are a clunky deck like 4-color, but your cards aren't as powerful by themselves, like individually, as 4-color cards are. So just
see you later.
If you want to win, I wouldn't recommend playing Blue-White. Okay, that's it. As always, you can find all of our links down below. There will be a link to our new website, Mystical Teachings, that you can see the name above. Links to our Twitters, Twitch streams, whatever, as well as a link to the article that Canister wrote that I mentioned before, and I encourage all of you to read it if you haven't already. That's it. We'll see you next week. Take care and bye-bye.
See ya.